This video's not made for kids, you crazy bitch-ass bastard!
Welcome back, my locomotive lovers! Now, in the last volume, we ended it off with 1949 when polling was banned worldwide. So now, in this volume, we will cover the 50s and 60s. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the rest of the timeline video. In 1950, some crazy events would occur on Sodor. Henry would encounter an elephant, Gordon and James would have trouble with the turntable, and eventually all three of the big engines would go on strike and not shunt their own trains until Sir Topham Hatt calls Edward to arrange the trains. But the three big engines start to harass Edward for shunting, continuing their rant about tender engines not shunting. So it led to Sir Topham Hatt purchasing a green saddle tank engine in some appearance of an Avon SS-class tank engine with additional pieces from a Hunslet from an engine workshop on the mainland. He would call him Percy. He was the new station pilot for Knapford, became the number 6, and the three big engines would be punished in their sheds, and eventually let out again. Gordon nearly collides with Percy later on, and Percy runs away to prevent a nasty accident. This would be the year Troublesome Engines would be written. Henry was still a bad steamer at the time because of his small firebox, so Sir Topham Hatt would purchase some Welsh coal for Henry to use, and it worked like a charm. One early winter morning in 1951, Henry would crash into a goods train while pulling the flying kipper. Afterwards, Sir Topham Hatt would send Henry to Crewe for a complete overhaul. After being rebuilt into an LMS Stanier 5MT, he returned back to Sodor. Gordon comments that Henry whistles too much, but then his own whistle would be jammed, letting out an ear-piercing noise. And Percy once insulted Henry's funnel for being too short, but received karma after running into a luggage trolley and having trousers wrapped around his funnel. And finally, Henry would teach some naughty boys a lesson by blowing ash and soot at them for dropping stones on him. This would be the year Henry the Green Engine would be written. Meanwhile, on the Skarloey Railway, Renius triumphantly gets his passengers to the next station with a jammed valve gear and officially left the Skarloey Railway for an overhaul. Freddie was borrowed from the aluminum company as a loan to work on the Skarloey Railway until 1955. Mr. Robert Sam retires from being controller of the Skarloey Railway and passes his work to his son, Mr. Peter Sam. A small quarry was excavated at the north of Renius. The slate there was free of metallic substances and used for the electric switchboards for the power station at Peel Godred. The slate was even delivered to foreign countries outside Sodor. Sir Topham Hatt and his grandchildren are on holiday in East Anglia and met Toby and enjoyed his company. The section of line Toby was running on was on the brink of closure. At the same time, back on Sodor on the Farquhar branch line, Thomas would run into trouble with a constable for not having wheel coverage. Sir Topham Hatt remembers Toby from East Anglia and figured it would be perfect to have a tram engine to run along Farquhar. After the Wisbech and Upwell tramway closed for good, the following day was a miracle for Toby and his crew. Toby, Henrietta, and a small luggage van named Elsie were officially purchased and now working on the island of Sodor as the number 7, taking workmen to and fro the quarry with some stone trains. In 1952, James at first takes a dislike to Toby and Henrietta until getting into a sticky situation with some tar wagons. During the wintertime, a landslide occurred by Mrs. Kindly's cottage, blocking Thomas's line. Even though she was old and ill, she saved Thomas by waving her red coat like a flag. The engine crews of Thomas and Toby and Sir Topham Hatt thanked Mrs. Kindly for her actions. This would be the year Toby the Tram Engine would be written. 1953, this year would be an eventful year for Gordon. He accidentally slips into a ditch. He was rescued later on at nighttime with the help of James and Henry. James struggles on Gordon's hill when leaves were blown on the line and starts to slide down. Thankfully, Gordon was there to bank James up the hill. Gordon would later be heroic again as he saves Thomas when he fell down a mine. And on the 2nd of June, Elizabeth II was crowned and is paying a visit to Sodor. At first, Henry was to bring her in with the royal train. At this time, he was given splashers again like a Jubilee Stanier. But his paint was spoiled by a painter that fell on him. A replacement was needed, and Sir Topham Hatt chose Gordon after he apologized for his behavior from the ditch incident. Gordon was honored to haul the royal train with Queen Elizabeth II. This would be the year Gordon the Big Engine would be written. 12 days later, on the 14th, BBC broadcasts would attempt to adapt the railway series with model trains and start with the story The Sad Story of Henry. It was a flop with the live bloopers. On the Skarloey Railway, Mr. Hugh would build his inspection trolley called the Flying Bedstead, or simply called Bedstead. During Christmas time, Thomas, Toby, Percy, and Terence were clearing snow around the Kindley's cottage, and a party was thrown at Tidman's sheds, where Mr. and Mrs. Kindley were invited. 1954 would be an eventful year for Edward. Gordon and Henry would tease Edward for being afraid of cows as a herd of them breaks the coupling off his cattle train, only for Gordon and Henry to run into a cow on a bridge, delaying both trains. Next, Edward would leave without Thomas's passengers after Thomas failed to arrive, not knowing Bertie was doing Thomas's job when Thomas's fireman was taken ill. This resulted in a chase until he finally caught up with Edward. Then Edward would save a traction engine named Trevor from the scrapyard at Cronk with the help of a vicar. And finally, he would afterwards rescue James from being a runaway light engine after a pair of naughty boys fiddled with his controls. This would be the year Edward the Blue Engine would be written. Sir Topham Hatt lastly announces his retirement of being controller and passes his job to his son, Charles Topham Hatt. In 1955, this would be a big one for the narrow-gauge engines on the Skarloey Railway. Edward meets up with Skarloey for the first time in a while and got to talking, mainly with Skarloey reminiscing Rennius. Freddie heads back to the aluminum works while Falcon and Stewart are now purchased to work on the Skarloey Railway and renamed Sir Handel and Peter Sam. Sir Handel didn't admire the coaches and called them cattle trucks. The coaches bite back when they held Sir Handel back at a hill. Mr. Peter Sam scolds at Sir Handel for his behavior, and does so again after Sir Handel refusing to work at the slate quarry and deliberately derailing. Now Sir Handel was shut up in the shed while Peter Sam did his work as well as his own. The overconfident personality trait gets the better of Peter Sam as he accidentally left a refreshment lady behind. finally, on market day, when Sir Handel still fails to cooperate with the coaches and Peter Sam away for maintenance, Skarloey was let out of his shed for the first time in 12 years, despite being in bad condition. During his job, he breaks a spring and tilted on his side, but he still pressed on and brought the passengers home. Skarloey was then planned to be mended, leaving Sir Handel and Peter Sam to run the line in his absence. This would be the year Four Little Engines was written. A pioneering hodgepodge engine, Grass Chomper, aka Hugh's Folly, became the Skarloey Railway's number 5, working on Fridays-only winter passenger services, as well as some maintenance work. In 1956, Percy would go through a lot, like learning about backing signals, only for it to be a trick from the big engines to teach Percy not to tease them. Charles Topham Hatt plans to reopen the South Knapford Harbor. Percy gets to work restoring the harbor. A Great Western 55-class pannier tank engine was brought to help. His name was Montague, but was more commonly called Duck. Eventually, after some commotion with the 2 tank engines and 3 big engines, Percy continues to work on the South Knapford Harbor's restoration, while Duck becomes the new pilot shunter of Knapford and becomes the Northwestern Railway's number 8. As restoration of the harbor continued, Percy meets Harold, a Westland Whirlwind helicopter at an airfield near the Farquhar branch line. He even has a little race with him. At last, the South Knapford Harbor was complete. Services ran there, and Percy was relocated to work on the Farquhar branch line. One stormy day, Percy promises to help Thomas get his passengers home, even when he had to trudge through some flooded track, and with the help from Harold. This would be the year Percy the Small Engine was written. Sir Topham Hatt I would sadly pass away this year, and his son Charles gained the Sir part of the Topham name, and now called Sir Charles Topham Hatt. In 1957, Percy would boast about braving through watery weather with a few engines at Barrow and Furness, but Percy's pride would eventually be washed away as he takes a plunge at the quay of the harbor. Gordon would take a train to London when an engine who originally meant to derails, while James pulls the express during Gordon's rest. At one point, he would have to push poor Toby and pull the express at the same time when Toby ran out of water. Due to the popularity of the Railway series, children were wondering if the engines of Sodor are real, so all 8 of the Northwestern engines embark on a trip to the mainland for a gathering meet and greet. This would be the year 8 famous engines would be written. This would also be the year where Grass Chomper on the Skarloey Railway would become dismantled after a failed gearbox. In 1958, City of Truro pays a visit to Sodor, and all the engines were excited to see him, except for Gordon. Turo's visit made Duck boastful about the Great Western Railway. It all stopped when a British Railways 08 class diesel shunter named Diesel arrives on trial. Duck was told by Sir Charles Topham Hatt to show him the ropes, only to trick him in attempting to shunt very old trucks. Diesel wants to get back at Duck and does so by lying to the trucks, telling them that Duck calls the big engines names. The trucks blurt out the names, and the big engines falsely accuse Duck for insulting them, much to Diesel's amusement. Sir Charles Topham Hatt then sends Duck to Wellsworth as a station pilot and banker for Gordon's Hill. During Duck's time on Edward's branch line, Sir Charles Topham Hatt eventually found out about Diesel's lies and sent him packing. Afterwards, as Duck was returning to Wellsworth from banking Edward's train, a runaway train was in pursuit on their line. Duck attempts to stop the trucks only to crash into a barber shop. After Duck's repairs, he returns as Knapford's pilot. This will be the year Duckin' the Diesel Engine would be written. In 1959, on the Skarloey Railway, Rusty was brought to work as a maintenance diesel and is the new current number 5. Sir Handel still refuses to work at the slate quarry and takes Gordon's advice to act ill. So Peter Sam takes over Sir Handel's work while the trucks put their plan, paying Sir Handel out into action at the incline, not knowing it's really Peter Sam. They rammed into Peter Sam, damaging his front end funnel. With Peter Sam out of service, a spare engine named Duncan was brought to do his work, as well as becoming the railway's number 6. Skarloey later returned from his overhaul and freed Duncan from being lodged in a tunnel. Later on, Rusty would be next to save Duncan after he derailed from rocking and rolling due to regaging issues. BBC producers come to broadcast the Skarloey Railway, and Skarloey then informs the staff about the Talc Flynn Railway in Wales and reveals he has a twin, Talc Flynn. This would be the year the little old engine would be written. Another pioneering engine was built. A configuration 420 Mercury tractor named Ivo's Ladybug was the number 7 of the railway. Meanwhile, on the mainland, steam starts to cease work from the more diesels coming into power. In 1960, the Northwestern Railway once again is in need of another engine to run goods trains. So Sir Charles Topham Hatt orders a Class 652 engine from Scotland, but was shocked to see not 1, but 2 engines. They were named Donald and Douglas. Sir Charles Topham Hatt asks them which engine was the one he truly ordered, only for the twins to reply that they lost their numbers on the way. Sir Charles Topham Hatt gives the Donald 9 and Douglas 10, but he was intended to send one of them back. Duck shows the Scottish twins the ropes of shunting in the yard, but one day Douglas was so worried about being sent back that he accidentally forgot to shunt Thomas's special coach to his train. To avoid complaints from passengers, the twins swapped tenders and attempted to make Sir Charles Topham Hatt aware that Donald had scuttled away with a goods train. But to no avail. Spiteful brake van was giving Douglas nonsense until Donald sorted the issue and made sure of it until he backed into a signal box tender first by accident. Sir Charles Topham Hatt was most annoyed and plans to send Donald packing after he's repaired, while James does his work. Douglas then tries to bank James's train up Gordon's Hill, but crushed the spiteful brake van during the process. During the wintertime, the Scottish twins were clearing snow and saved Henry from a snowdrift. The twins were still worried about one of them getting the boot until Percy encouraged Sir Charles Topham Hatt and gave him a deputation. This will be the year the twin engines was written. Also in that year on the mainland, the Bluebell Railway was formed with their mascot engine, Stepney. In 1961, Thomas becomes cocky when his driver jokingly stated that he can drive on his own, only to crash into a station master's house during breakfast time after a cleaner messes with his controls. While Thomas is away to be mended, a Class 101 single-unit diesel rail car named Daisy takes over. She was rude and snobby to the engines and coaches, and was rather lazy and stubborn when she refuses to take a milk tanker along with her work. She once approached a bull and failed to shoo it off the line, not to mention giving her a fright. One day, once again, Daisy leaves the milk behind, so Toby takes the milk while Percy takes his trucks. Disappointed, the trucks pay Percy out by making him run into and crash a brake van and piled himself on top of a train. On the day after the predicament, Thomas returns from the works and Daisy stays on the Farquhar branch line. This will be the year branch line engines would be written. In 1962, on the Skarloey Railway, Peter Sam's funnel was still wobbly after the accident at the slate quarry. One day, he lost his funnel from a hanging icicle in a tunnel. He used an old drain pipe for a funnel until Mr. Peter Sam introduced a new square funnel to him, a Giesel. Sir Handel got fed up with the other engines teasing his steamroller wheels when he got new trailing wheels. He learns about a rude Aveling Bradford R-Class steamroller named George and got into an accident with him and his train at Benglass. Duncan complains that he wasn't polished enough and one time stopped on a viaduct refusing to work. After Skarloey tells Duncan and Peter Sam Rennius's last job on the railway and being a gallant engine back in 1951, Duncan now understands how important the railway is, and on the following day, Rennius returns home from his overhaul. This would be the year Gallant Old Engine would be released. Sadly, later that year, Ivo's Ladybug would be withdrawn and dismantled. Speaking of overhaul, Coley from the Coleyfell Railway is sent to the mainland to be overhauled, with the original 2 to 5 mountain engines having a lot to do on their railway. 3 new mountain engines with superheaters arrived to work: Lord Harry No. 6, Alaric 7, and Eric 8. In 1963, while Percy and Douglas were talking about bluebells, another celebrity engine arrives on the island as a rail tour, Stepney the Bluebell engine. During this year, he worked on Thomas's branch line for a little while. At first, Thomas was upset when he stopped to let Stepney pass with a VIP on board, but bonded with him the next day after finding out Stepney was astonished with his branch line. Stepney then pulled a line of plank wagons from the harbor to Farquhar. During the run, he puffs off with the only ball the cricketers were using for their game. The chase was on, much to the dismay of a Morris Oxford bullnose cabiole named Caroline. On Stepney's last day of Sodor, a new diesel was being trialed, a Class 40 numbered D261. He was due to take a passenger train, but breaks down after sucking up a bowler hat through his air intake. Stepney and Duck double-headed to pull the train and arrived early, much to Gordon's surprise. The next day was when Stepney left Sodor in style and the Class 40 left in disgrace. This would be the year Stepney the Bluebell engine would be written. In 1964, Coley returns to Sodor from his overhaul and tells the Skarloey engines about his railway's early months. The number 5 engine, Shane Dewey, was sent to the mainland for his overhaul, while Coley was brought back to meet the new engines 6 to 8. Lord Harry was a loud and daring engine, wanting excitement on the mountain railway. That evening, he jumped a set of points and derailed at the summit, angering passengers. As a punishment, Lord Harry had his nameplates taken away, assigned to do maintenance duties. One day, there was a climbing accident at the summit. It was up to number 6 to save the climbers and succeeded. Number 6 was praised for his antics and renamed Patrick after the climber he saved. This would be the year mountain engines would be written. Ballast was discovered along the former Mid-Sodor Railway, so the railway staff and controllers decide to build a 15-inch miniature gauge railway over the bedsheet of the Mid-Sodor. In 1965, on their 100th birthday, Skarloey and Rennius recalled their first couple years on Sodor. Meanwhile, Peter Sam was mortified terrified after hearing Duck tell him the Dukes were all scrapped. He thought Duck was referring to Duke from the Mid-Sodor Railway, but relieved when it was really a person. The Duke of Sodor, or more commonly known as Sir Richard Robert Norby. The Duke attended the opening of the Lakeside Loop, announced a speech, and Renius informs everyone to visit his and Skarloey's twins along the Tallaght-Flynn Railway, Dolgoch and Tallaght-Flynn. This would be the year Very Old Engines would be written. Shane Dewey's overhaul would be complete, and he too returns to the Cullifell Railway. Meanwhile, on the Northwestern Railway, 2 branch lines would be affected by Dr. B. Ching's Railway Acts. The line that ran from Ballyhoo to Normanby, and the Old Mansion line. In 1966, on the Peel-Godred branch line, a Class 86 electric engine was ordered to haul goods. Elmer was demoted from mixed traffic to just passenger trains. On the Northwestern Railway, a new diesel arrives on Sodor to work on Edwards branch line, a Class 28 numbered D5702, simply called Boko. Once he took the China Clay Twins trucks by mistake, the saddle tank engines antagonized him until Edwards sorted them out. One day at Tidmouth Station, a beehive broke open and bees swarmed around James, with one of the bees stinging his nose. Gordon mentions that branch lines are vulgar to Edward before departing with a late-night train, but he departs too early after his driver mistakes a floppy green hat for a flag. After missing his path, Gordon had to wait until Edward left the station, who was overdue to leave. The following day came, and Gordon was sulking at Brendam. Bill and Ben jokingly threatened Gordon to be chucked into the sea until Boko concluded the twins' nonsense. This made Gordon respect Boko. Finally that year, Edward was assigned to take enthusiasts home after their trip to the clay pits. But on the way back, the weather changed and one of Edward's crank pins snapped. But with the removal of the coupling rod and loosening the chain couplers on the coaches, Edward managed to get the train home. He was escorted to Crovan's Gate to be repaired while Boko looked after his trains during his absence and becomes a new member of the Brendam branch line. This would be the year mainline engines would be written. In 1967, a ballast spreader rail machine was purchased, as well as a miniature gauge railway called the Arlesdale Railway was finished being built. It was built by miniature diesels, Blisters 1 and 2, ran by Fergus Duncan, and 3 steam engines were brought to the railway: Rex, Mike, and Bert. Duck was assigned to escort ballast from the Arlesdale Railway to wherever it was needed, and got to meet the miniature gauge engines. As for the engines themselves, their first year working has its peaks and valleys. When Bert was pulling a passenger train, he was splashed on by Wilbur Audrey driving his car. When Teddy Boston took Bert's return train home, Bert retaliates by blowing smoke and steam on wet branches above them, and water droplets fell onto them as well as other passengers. No one was happy after that. Mike would be boastful about his whistle after hearing about Duck's whistle being out of order to be used to fry an egg, only to lose his whistle in a cow field after trying to shoo a cow off the line. The passengers whistled for Mike for the rest of the journey home. Later, Rex was taking a wool train, then derailed from bales of wood from a dawdling tractor driver, Willie. This would be the year small railway engines would be written. Frank, a miniature gauge diesel, would arrive later in the year as the line from Tidmouth to Arlesburg reopens as a branch line. Even a new engine shed was being built at Tidmouth Halt. Because Duck did so well with the ballast runs, he was relocated to work on the Little Western. In 1968, Gordon learns the grim fate of his siblings and becomes utterly depressed, until Sir Charles Topham Hatt allows his only surviving brother to visit Sodor for a couple days, the Flying Scotsman, who was saved from being scrapped by Alan Pegler back in 1963, making him the third celebrity engine to visit Sodor. Henry hears that the Flying Scotsman has 2 tenders and becomes envious. Duck informs Henry that he can have his 6 tenders, but didn't specify the tender's condition until too late. As he returns home with a jammed regulator and tender first, he runs into a diesel on trial, D199. He broke down at a crossing while hauling tankers. Henry helps 199 continue the rest of the journey with him when another diesel on trial, a Class 35 High-Mech diesel numbered 7101, passes by with a passenger train, and he too failed to work. Henry helps both diesels to their final destination, and while he helps 7101 get to the works, 199 got the boot. At midnight on the mainland, Douglas was taking a train to Barrow and Furness when he saw a Great Western Class 14 engine, Oliver, that attempted to escape scrap, only to run out of steam and is now stranded in the yard with his auto coach Isabel and his brake van towed. Douglas willingly helps the 3 escape to Sodor. The Flying Scotsman leaves Sodor. 7101 stays on Sodor, gets repainted and renamed Bear. And now Oliver is the number 11 of the Northwestern Railway and helps Duck on his branch line, while Toad becomes Douglas's brake van. This would be the year enterprising engines would be written. Another note that happened on the mainland is when all steam services retired from mainline duties. However, on Sodor, the Locomotive Salvation Act was added to its independence from 48 and was passed to preserve any type of locomotive by the hands of the Topham bloodline. Meanwhile, an FSALN 772 class was brought to work after Charles Topham Hatt was impressed by her. Her name was Befana, being a part of the occasional boat trains from Kirk Ronan to Vickerstown. In 1969, 2 years after the Little Western reopens, some events go down. Donald makes fun of Duck by making quacking noises, and Duck pays back by having his crew plant an egg in Donald's tender. A duckling hatches and is named Dilly. Oliver becomes overconfident after receiving praise from the big engines about his daring escape. This behavior eventually ends when trucks pushed him into a turntable well. After the accident, the trucks sang a rude song about the event with their ringleader, Scruffy. Toad instructs Oliver to haul the trucks with the worst behavior. Scruffy passes the word to hold back, but Oliver was determined to pull the train, but accidentally rips Scruffy in half. Thankfully he was fixed, but now the trucks stopped teasing Oliver for a good long time. Then a bad-tempered double-decker bus arrives to work on the Little Western's road service. This bus and his driver, a young man named Brandon Dickerson, hates the rail transport with a burning passion. Oliver calls the bus Bulgy. One day, Brandon made Bulgy wear a sign, railway bus, and took the train's passengers away. Duck chases after Bulgy until he was wedged under a bridge. Despite the bridge's risky, wobbly condition, Duck manages to cross over safely with the passengers. Now Duck and Oliver never received any hassle from Bulgy, because he got converted into a hen house. And Brandon Dickerson was fired and got demoted to being a newspaper lad. This would be the year Oliver the Western Engine would be written. Flying Scotsman would begin his North American tour that year as well, traveling to the United States and a bit of Canada. This is where we will conclude our 4th volume of the Tales of the Northwestern Rails timeline. Join us next month for when we go over the 70s and 80s.